The knock at my front door came so softly, I almost thought I imagined it. It was early evening, the hour when the sun dipped low and painted long golden lines across my living room floor. The smell of chamomile tea still floated in the air, warm and sweet, just like the kind my best friend Leela used to drink whenever she was nervous. I had just set my mug down when I heard it again. Knock, knock. Slow, careful, like whoever stood on the other side wasn't sure they should be there. I wiped my hands on my sweater and walked toward the door, my heart strangely heavy for no clear reason. I remember thinking it was probably the neighbor's kid asking for a charger again, or maybe a delivery. But when I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. The man standing there was supposed to be dead. His hair was a little longer than I remembered, and there were faint dark circles under his eyes, but there was no mistaking him. Same narrow face, same crooked smile, same husband my best friend had buried 3 months ago. "Hello, Marissa," he said softly. "We need to talk." For a moment, the world tilted. The walls of my home, the home I had lived in for 12 years, felt like they were closing in on me. My ears rang and my fingers tightened around the edge of the door until my knuckles turned white. "Daniel?" I whispered. He nodded slowly, and in that instant, every tear I had cried with Leela, every casserole I had brought over, every night I held her while she sobbed about losing the love of her life, came crashing down on me. Because the dead don't knock on doors. Before all of this, my life was simple. Not perfect, just peaceful. I worked as a dental assistant at a small clinic downtown. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills and kept my mind busy. My husband passed away 5 years earlier from a sudden heart attack, leaving me alone in the house we had built together. We never had children, so the silence sometimes felt louder than it should. That's where Leela came in. She'd been my best friend since high school. We used to sit in the back of math class passing notes about boys we liked, laughing so hard the teacher would glare at us. We went through breakups together, college stress together, weddings together. She married Daniel 10 years ago. He was charming in a quiet way, not the loud kind of funny, but the type who listened and smiled like he understood you. He worked in construction management, always came home dusty and tired, but he adored Leela. At least, that's what I thought. They lived just 15 minutes away, and we saw each other almost every weekend. Sunday dinners were a tradition. Leela always brought her homemade peach cobbler. Daniel grilled chicken on the patio, humming off key to old rock songs. Life felt warm back then, safe. When my husband died, it was Leela who slept beside me for weeks. It was Daniel who fixed my broken porch step without charging me a dime. They were my family. So when Leela called me one rainy afternoon, her voice trembling so badly I could barely understand her, my heart dropped. "Marissa," she sobbed, "Daniel's gone." I remember gripping the phone so tight it hurt. "Gone where?" I asked stupidly. He was in an accident," she whispered. "On the highway. A truck lost control. They said he didn't feel anything." The rain outside my window beat hard against the glass, like the sky was crying with her. I drove to our house immediately. The place was filled with people, neighbors, co-workers, distant cousins. The air smelled like coffee and wet coats. Leela sat on the couch like a broken doll, her eyes swollen, hands shaking. When she saw me, she collapsed into my arms. "I don't know how to live without him," she cried into my shoulder. I held her while my own tears soaked into her hair. "I'm here," I kept whispering. "You're not alone." The funeral was small, closed casket. They said his body was too damaged to view. I didn't question it. None of us did. Leela clutched a framed photo of Daniel in a navy suit, smiling wide. The pastor spoke of love, about loss, about how life is fragile. I cried so hard my chest hurt. After that, Leela came over almost every day. Sometimes she talked, sometimes she just sat on my couch staring at nothing. I cooked for her, cleaned her house when she couldn't get out of bed, paid for groceries when she forgot her wallet. She'd squeeze my hand and say, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And I meant it when I said, "That's what friends are for." A few weeks later, she mentioned something that made my stomach twist. "Daniel had some debts I didn't know about," she said quietly while stirring her tea. "Credit cards, a small business loan." "Oh, Leela," I said softly. "I don't know how I'm going to manage," she whispered. "They're calling me nonstop." I offered what I could at first, a few $100s here and there, but the stress only seemed to grow. One night, she broke down crying on my kitchen floor. "They're threatening to take the house," she sobbed. "Marissa, I swear I wouldn't ask if I had any other choice." My heart hurt for her. I had savings, not a fortune, but money my husband and I had put away over years, for emergencies, for retirement, for life. "You can borrow some," I said gently. "We'll figure it out." Her eyes filled with relief. "You're an angel," she whispered. Over the next 2 months, I gave her more and more. 10,000, then 15, then almost 30. Each time she promised she'd pay me back when insurance came through. I didn't worry. She was my sister in everything but blood. But sometimes I noticed little things. She stopped crying as much. She started dressing nicer again. New purse, fresh nails. When I asked, she brushed it off. "My cousin helped me out," she'd say. I told myself grief worked strange ways, until the night I heard that knock and saw a dead man breathing on my doorstep. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Daniel stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, hands stuffed deep in the pockets of his jacket. The porch light flickered softly above his head, buzzing like a trapped insect. I could hear a car passing down the street, someone laughing in the distance, the ordinary sounds of life continuing as if nothing impossible was happening. My chest felt tight. This isn't funny," I finally whispered. "I know," he said quietly. "I'm sorry." Sorry. That word hit me harder than anything else. "Lila buried you," I said, my voice shaking. "I held her while she cried. I watched them lower your coffin into the ground." He closed his eyes slowly. "There was no body," he said, "just an empty box." My stomach rolled. "What are you talking about?" I snapped. "I went to the funeral, Daniel." "I know," he replied. "I watched from across the street." I felt dizzy. The edges of my vision blurred, as if I might faint right there on the porch. "You watched?" I repeated. He nodded. "I couldn't come inside. It wasn't part of the plan." Plan? That word made my skin crawl. I stepped back instinctively. "Get out," I said softly. "You need to leave right now." "Marissa, please," he said, raising his hand slightly. "Just hear me out. I didn't want to do it like this. But Lila won't answer my calls anymore, and I know she's been taking money from you." My heart slammed in my chest. "How do you know that?" I asked. He looked down. "Because it was supposed to be split between us." The world seemed to crack open beneath my feet. "You're lying," I said. "She wouldn't." "She would," he said gently, "and she did." My throat burned. "Why are you here?" I whispered. He took a deep breath. "I left town for a while. The fake accident? It was to collect insurance money. But things went wrong. The claim was denied because of some paperwork issue, so Lila switched plans." "And that plan was me?" I said bitterly. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I slowly sank onto the chair beside the door. My legs felt weak. "You let her mourn you," I said quietly. "You let her cry on my shoulder." "I didn't think she'd drag you into it." "But she did," I snapped, "and you didn't stop her." He swallowed. "I tried calling you," he said softly, "but she blocked me from everything once she got the money." My hands trembled. "How long were you gone?" I asked. "Almost 3 months," he replied. And where were you? With my brother in another state. We were waiting for the insurance payout. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. So you faked your death for money, and when that didn't work, you both decided to steal mine? He nodded slowly. I didn't know she was going to keep it all, he said. I thought she'd give me my share. My chest tightened with anger. Are you hearing yourself? I whispered. You're upset she stole your stolen money. He flinched. I deserve that, he said quietly. Silence hung between us. I could hear my clock ticking inside the house. Each second felt heavier than the last. Where is she now? I asked. Half the time at your place, or out shopping apparently. The image of her new purse flashed in my mind. My hands curled into fists. Why come to me? I asked. Because you deserve to know, and because I don't have anything left. I stared at him. You ruined your life, I said flatly. I know, he replied. And you ruined mine, too. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm sorry, Marissa. I stood slowly. Sorry doesn't fix betrayal. I walked past him into the house and grabbed my phone. He followed nervously. What are you doing? I asked. I'm calling the police. He froze. Wait, he said quickly. If you do that, Lila will be arrested too. I paused. And, I said coldly. He looked panicked. She's my wife. She stopped being my friend the moment she lied about your death. He lowered his head. I just thought maybe you'd want your money back first. That made me stop. My savings, years of hard work, gone. You know where it is? I asked slowly. He nodded. She moved it into a new account in her name only, he said. I overheard her on the phone. Can you prove it? I asked quickly. I can show you messages and emails. She didn't erase everything. I stared at him for a long moment. A part of me wanted to slam the door in his face and dial the police immediately, but another part of me, the part that remembered every dollar I'd handed over with trust, wanted justice, real justice. Come inside, I said finally. He stepped cautiously into my living room. The lamp glowed softly, lighting up the framed photo of Lila and me from last summer at the lake. We were laughing, arms around each other. I swallowed hard. Daniel pulled out his phone. There, he said, scrolling. Look. I leaned closer. There were messages from Lila. Insurance isn't working. I'm using Marissa now. She trusts me. She won't question it. Once I get enough, I'm done with her. My breath hitched. She called me an easy target, I whispered. Daniel nodded. There's more. He showed me bank transfer confirmations, amounts that matched exactly what I'd given her. My hand shook. She planned this, I said. Yes, he replied quietly. Anger burned deep in my chest, hotter than any sadness. Not just anger, determination. I'm not letting her get away with this, I said firmly. Daniel looked up. What are you going to do? He asked. I took a slow breath. I'm going to let her think she won, and then I'm going to take everything back. That night, after Daniel left through the back door so no neighbors would see him, I sat alone in my living room for a long time. The house felt different, colder. Every memory of Leela laughing on my couch, crying into my shoulder, sipping tea from my favorite mug now felt tainted, like fingerprints on glass you can't wipe clean. I replayed her words in my mind. You're an angel. I don't know what I'd do without you. All lies. Or maybe not lies, just tools. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each sound reminding me that time was passing, and with it, my chance to fix what had been done. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept seeing Daniel's face at the door, alive, breathing, and Leela's messages, cold, calculating. By morning, my sadness had settled into something steadier, resolve. If Leela thought she could steal from me and disappear, she was wrong. The next day, I went about things as usual. I made coffee, went to work, smiled at patients, answered emails, but inside I was watching everything carefully. When my phone buzzed around noon, I knew who it was before I even looked. Leela. "Hey, sweetheart," her voice said cheerfully when I answered. "I just wanted to check in. I haven't seen you in 2 days." Her tone was so normal, so warm, it almost made me doubt everything. Almost. "I've just been tired," I said softly. "Work's been busy." "Oh," she sighed dramatically. "I know how that feels." I clenched my jaw. "How are things with the debts?" I asked casually. She paused just a second too long. "They're still calling. I'm so scared, Marissa." I pretended to sound concerned. "I might be able to help a little more," I said slowly. Her breath caught. "Really?" she asked quickly. "Oh my God, you don't know what that means to me." I swallowed hard. "I can come by tonight," I said. "Yes," she replied immediately. "Please." After I hung up, my hands were shaking, but I forced myself to breathe. This wasn't about anger anymore. This was about clarity. That evening, I drove to her house, the same house I had cleaned while she grieved. The porch light glowed warmly. She opened the door with a tired smile. "Oh, Marissa," she pulled me into a hug. I could smell her new perfume, something expensive, floral, and sweet, not the kind she used to wear. "You look exhausted," she said. "So do you," I replied softly. We sat at her kitchen table, the same table where Daniel used to joke while eating dinner. "I hate asking again, but the bank said I have to make another payment or they'll start foreclosure." My heart pounded. "How much?" I asked, whispering. 5,000, she whispered. I nodded slowly. "I can transfer it," I said, "but I'd feel better if I went with you tomorrow. Maybe I can talk to them." Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. Nervousness. "Oh, I already spoke to them," she said quickly. "They said online is fine." "I insist," I said gently. "Your family." She forced a smile. "Well, okay." That night, I didn't send any money. Instead, I went home and called my bank. I explained the situation carefully. The woman on the phone listened quietly. "I believe you're a victim of fraud. We can open an investigation." I felt my throat tighten. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Bring any proof you have tomorrow." I also went to the police station. It was strange walking in there with such a heavy heart. I gave a statement, showed them the messages Daniel had shared. The officer nodded slowly. "This looks like a planned scam," he said. "We'll start a case." I exhaled shakily. "But," he added, "it helps if we catch her in the act." A plan formed in my mind. The next morning, I texted Leela. "I spoke to my bank. They want me to do a cashier's check instead of transfer. It'll take a few hours." She replied almost instantly. "That's fine. Thank you again. I love you." Love. The word felt bitter now. Around noon, I met Daniel at a cafe across town. He looked tired. "You sure about this?" he asked nervously. "Yes," I said firmly. "You'll come to the bank with us." "Why?" he asked nervously. "So she sees you alive, and so the truth can't be denied." He swallowed. "She's going to freak out." "Good," I replied softly. By late afternoon, I told Leela I was ready to go to the bank. She sounded relieved. We met in front of the building. She wore a bright blouse, her hair neatly done, not someone drowning in grief. "Thank you again," she said, squeezing my hand. I forced a small smile. As we walked inside, my heart was racing. We sat down with a bank officer. "I'm here to help my sister with her payments," I said calmly. The officer nodded. "Of course." Leela began explaining the debts. And just as she finished, I heard footsteps behind us, slow, familiar. "Leela," a voice said quietly. She froze. The color drained from her face. She turned slowly, and there stood Daniel, alive, breathing, staring right at her. Her mouth fell open. "Daniel," she whispered. People in the bank began to stare. "I thought you were dead," she said shakily. "I was," he replied, "according to you." She started to tremble. "What is this?" she hissed at me. I met her eyes. "This is the truth," I said calmly. Tears filled her eyes. "You set me up," she whispered. "You set yourself up," I replied. The bank officer looked confused. "What's going on?" he asked. I took a deep breath. She faked her husband's death and took tens of thousands of dollars from me, pretending it was for debts. Leela let out a shaky laugh. "She's lying," she said quickly. Daniel pulled out his phone. "So are these messages lies too?" he asked, holding it up. Her face crumbled. The bank officer stood up. "I'm calling security," he said firmly. Within minutes, 2 guards came over, and shortly after that, the police. Leela sank into the chair, her shoulders shaking. "I just needed the money," she whispered weakly. I looked at her, really looked at her, the woman I had trusted with my heart, and I felt something unexpected. Not hate, just sadness. The bank felt suddenly too small, too quiet. Every whisper, every shuffle of feet echoed loudly as the police officers approached our table. Leela sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. One officer spoke calmly. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." Leela's eyes darted between me and Daniel. "Marissa, please," she said, her voice cracking. "You know I didn't mean to hurt you." I stared at her, my chest tight. "You planned this," I said softly. "You wrote it in messages. You called me an easy target." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was desperate," she whispered. Daniel scoffed quietly. "Desperate enough to fake my death?" he said bitterly. She didn't answer. The officers helped her stand. As they led her away, she turned back one last time. "I thought you'd always be there for me," she cried. I met her gaze calmly. "I was," I said, "until you decided to use me." The doors closed behind her with a dull thud. The bank officer apologized quietly for what I'd gone through. Daniel stood beside me, his hands shaking. "I never wanted it to go this far," he murmured. I looked at him. "You started this," I said gently, "but you also ended it." He nodded slowly. "I'm going to turn myself in," he said. "I already told them everything." I was surprised. "Why?" I asked. "Because I can't live with it anymore," he said quietly, "and because you deserve peace." A strange weight lifted from my chest. Not forgiveness, but closure. Over the next few weeks, everything moved fast. The police investigated the fake accident, insurance fraud, the money transfers. It all painted a clear picture. Leela was charged with fraud and theft. Daniel faced charges too, but because he came forward and helped, the judge was easier on him. My money was frozen in her account while the case went through court. Those weeks were some of the hardest of my life. I felt empty, like someone had ripped out a piece of my history. I kept replaying every memory, wondering when the real Leela disappeared. Was she always capable of this, or did something change her? Some nights I cried, not just for the money, but for the friendship I thought was real. Other nights, I felt angry. How could she sit in my house, drink my tea, and lie so easily? But slowly, something else crept in. Relief. The truth was out. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't foolish for trusting. I was simply human. The day of the court hearing arrived on a gray morning. The sky hung low and heavy. Daniel sat on one side of the room, Leela on the other. She looked smaller somehow. No makeup, hair pulled back loosely. When she saw me walk in, her eyes filled with tears. I sat quietly. The judge listened carefully as the evidence was presented. Messages, bank records, statements, the fake death plan. There was no denying it. When it was time for Leela to speak, her voice trembled. I was scared. We were drowning in debt. When the insurance failed, I panicked. I never thought it would go this far. I closed my eyes briefly. The judge spoke firmly. Fear does not excuse deception. You betrayed someone who trusted you. Leela was sentenced to time in prison and ordered to repay every dollar. Daniel received probation and community service. When it was over, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness, relief, and a quiet strength. Outside the courthouse, Daniel approached me. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know," I replied softly. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make it right." "You did the right thing in the end." He nodded. "I hope you find peace," he said before walking away. I watched him go. Then I turned and walked toward my car, toward my life. A few months later, the bank returned my money, every last dollar. I cried when I saw the deposit notification, not because I was rich again, but because justice had been done. I used part of it to finally fix the porch my husband had promised to repair years ago. I repainted the living room a soft, warm color, opened the windows more, let light in. I started taking evening walks again, smelling fresh grass, listening to birds settle for the night. Little things that reminded me life kept moving. Friends invited me out more. I even joined a small book club at the library. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't living in the shadow of betrayal. I was building something new. One afternoon, I received a letter. It was from Leela. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside, her handwriting was messy. "Marissa, I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry. I lost myself in fear and greed. You were the best friend anyone could ask for, and I threw it away. Telling the truth to you would have been easier than living with what I did. I hope you will heal completely." I folded the letter slowly. Tears slid down my cheeks, not because I wanted her back in my life, but because I finally felt the last piece of pain release. I whispered quietly, "I forgive you. Not for her, for me." Forgiveness didn't come all at once. It came slowly, like sunlight creeping through a window after a long night. Some days I still woke up with that heavy feeling in my chest, the memory of Lila's laughter, Daniel's knock at the door, the cold realization that everything I believed had been a lie. But other days I felt lighter, stronger, like I had survived something that could have broken me. I started writing in a small notebook every morning. Nothing fancy, just thoughts, feelings, memories. Sometimes I wrote about my husband, how he used to whistle while cooking breakfast, how he always forgot where he put his keys. Sometimes I wrote about Lila, the good memories and the bad. And sometimes I wrote about myself, about how easy it was to trust, about how hard it was to heal, but how healing was possible. One afternoon, as I was leaving the grocery store, I ran into Mrs. Carter, an older woman who lived a few houses down. "I heard what happened," she said softly, placing a gentle hand on my arm. "I'm so sorry, dear." Word had spread around the neighborhood. I nodded. "It's been a lot," I admitted. "But you handled it with grace," she said. "Not everyone could." Her words warmed something inside me. "Thank you," I said quietly. Later that week, a coworker invited me to dinner with her family. We laughed, shared stories. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like the broken woman everyone pitied. I felt normal again, alive again. As weeks turned into months, I slowly reclaimed parts of my life I had let fade. I started gardening again, planting roses along the fence like my husband and I always planned. My hands got dirty, my knees ached, but watching something grow felt healing. I volunteered at a small community center on weekends, helping organize food donations. Listening to other people's stories reminded me that pain was something everyone carried in different ways, and that kindness mattered. One evening, while watering the roses, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. For a split second, my heart jumped, but when I answered, it was just a woman from the community center confirming a schedule. I laughed softly at myself. Not every call meant danger. Not every knock meant betrayal. Slowly, my fear faded. One quiet night, I sat on my porch watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The breeze smelled like fresh grass and warm earth. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and sipped tea, the same chamomile tea I used to drink with Lila. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to make it again, but tonight it tasted comforting, not painful. I thought about everything that had happened, how grief had turned into trust, trust into betrayal, betrayal into strength. If Daniel hadn't shown up at my door, I might have lost everything, but even in deception, the truth found a way out. I realized something then. Being kind hadn't been my weakness. Letting someone use that kindness was their failure. A year passed. The roses bloomed beautifully. The house felt warm again. Laughter returned, sometimes mine, sometimes friends. I even went on a few dates. Nothing serious, but it felt nice to be reminded that life could still hold new beginnings. One afternoon, as I cleaned out a drawer, I found an old photo, Lila and me at 18, young, smiling wide, dreaming about our futures. I stared at it for a long time. Then I gently placed it back in the drawer. Some memories didn't need to be erased. They just needed to rest. What happened taught me something I'll never forget. Sometimes the people closest to us are capable of the deepest hurt. But it also taught me something even more important. We are stronger than betrayal, stronger than lies, stronger than loss. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pain. I still think about Lila sometimes. I hope she's learning. I hope she's growing. But she's no longer part of my story. My story now is about moving forward, about trust rebuilt slowly, about loving life again. Life settled into a quieter rhythm after everything, but quiet doesn't always mean easy. Some mornings I woke up feeling strong, like I had conquered something huge. Other mornings, the memories crept in before I even opened my eyes. The sound of that knock at the door, Daniel's face, Leela's voice telling me she loved me. Betrayal has a strange way of lingering. It hides in ordinary moments, like when I passed the coffee aisle and saw Leela's favorite brand, or when I heard a song we used to sing loudly in the car. I would freeze for just a second, then breathe, and keep going. Healing wasn't a straight line. It was a winding road with steps forward and backward. One afternoon, while I was tending to my roses, a familiar car slowed in front of my house. My heart skipped. But when it stopped, it wasn't Leela. It was her older sister, Karen. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. She stepped out slowly, looking nervous. "Marissa," she said softly. I stood up, brushing dirt from my hands. "Karen," I replied. We stood there awkwardly for a moment. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said, "but I wanted to talk to you." I nodded. "Come sit," I said gently. We settled on the porch chairs, the same ones Leela used to sit in. Karen clasped her hands tightly. "I had no idea what she was doing," she said, her voice breaking. "When the police came to our parents' house, we were shocked." I studied her face. She looked genuinely hurt. "I'm sorry," she continued, "for everything she did to you." I sighed quietly. "I know you weren't part of it," I said. She wiped her eyes. "She's always been impulsive, but I never imagined this." Neither had I. "She called me from jail," Karen said softly. "She keeps crying, keeps saying she ruined everything." I didn't respond. "I'm not asking you to forgive her," Karen added quickly. "I just wanted you to know you didn't deserve any of this." Tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. We sat in silence for a few moments. "Her parents are ashamed," Karen said, "but they also hope she learns." "I hope so too," I said quietly. Karen stood. "I won't bother you again," she said gently. "I just needed to say I'm sorry." As she walked away, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not closure, but understanding. That night I dreamed of Leela. We were sitting on the beach like we used to during summer trips. The sun was warm. She looked like the Leela I remembered before everything went wrong. Happy. "I'm sorry," she said in the dream. I woke up with tears on my pillow, but my heart felt lighter. Weeks later, I was at the community center organizing donated clothes when a young woman named Tasha approached me. "You're Marissa, right?" she asked shyly. "Yes," I said, smiling. "I heard about what you went through," she said. "My aunt went through something similar with her boyfriend." I nodded gently. "She lost everything," Tasha continued, "but seeing how you stood up for yourself gave her hope." I was surprised. "Really?" I asked softly. "Yes," she said. "You're kind of inspiring around here." I laughed quietly. "I don't feel very inspiring," I admitted. "Well, you are," she smiled. Her words stayed with me all day. Maybe pain could turn into something meaningful. Maybe my story could help others. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and opened my notebook again. I wrote about betrayal, about trust, about standing up for yourself even when it hurts. I didn't know why, but writing felt important, like I was turning pain into something useful. A month later, I got a call from the courthouse. They needed me to sign final paperwork for the restitution payments. When I went in, I saw Leela briefly in the hallway. She was wearing a plain uniform, her hair pulled back. She looked tired, older. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she whispered, "Marissa." I hesitated, but slowly I walked closer. "I'm sorry," she said again, tears in her eyes. "I wish I could take it all back." I looked at her carefully. "I believe you're sorry now," I said softly. She sobbed quietly. "I was so scared. I thought money would fix everything." "It never does," I replied. She nodded. "I ruined the best friendship I ever had." I swallowed hard. "You made a choice," I said gently. "Now you have to live with it." She reached out slightly, then stopped. "I hope you're happy," she whispered. "I'm learning to be," I said. The guard gently guided her away. I stood there shaking, but strangely peaceful. That encounter didn't reopen my wounds. It closed another layer. I realized I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her pain. I simply wished her growth. And I wished myself peace. After seeing Lila at the courthouse, something inside me shifted. For so long, I had carried her betrayal like a heavy stone in my chest. But standing there, looking at her tired eyes and trembling hands, I finally understood that holding on to anger wasn't protecting me anymore. It was just weighing me down. That evening, I took a long walk through the park near my house. Children were playing tag, their laughter echoing across the grass. A couple sat on a bench feeding ducks pieces of bread. The sky was slowly turning purple as the sun dipped lower. Life was moving forward, and so was I. I sat on a bench and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the breeze brush against my face. I whispered softly, "I choose peace." And for the first time, I truly meant it. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. My supervisor at the clinic called me into her office. "Marissa," she said warmly, "I've been meaning to talk to you." I sat down, a little nervous. "We've noticed how reliable you are and how well patients respond to you." I smiled politely. "We'd like to offer you a promotion, office coordinator." My heart jumped. "Really?" I asked. "Yes," she laughed. "You've earned it." Tears filled my eyes. "Thank you so much," I whispered. The raise wasn't huge, but it meant recognition. It meant growth. It meant a new chapter. With my new position came new confidence. I decorated the small office desk with a photo of my roses and a little plant that I watered every morning. I talked more with coworkers, laughed more. I even started mentoring a younger assistant who reminded me of myself when I first started. Helping others felt good. One Saturday morning, I received an email from the community center. They were planning a small event about financial safety and scams. They asked if I would be willing to share my experience. At first, I hesitated. The thought of talking about it in front of people made my stomach twist. But then I remembered Tasha's words, "You're kind of inspiring." Maybe sharing could help someone else avoid the pain I went through. So I said yes. The day of the event, my hands were shaking as I stood behind the podium. About 20 people sat in folding chairs, young adults, parents, seniors, all listening. I took a deep breath. "My name is Marissa, and I trusted someone with my whole heart." As I told my story, the room grew quiet. I talked about friendship, about grief, about lies, about losing everything and finding strength again. Some people wiped tears from their eyes, others nodded knowingly. When I finished, there was a soft applause. A woman approached me afterward. "Thank you," she said quietly. "My sister's been asking me for money and something felt off. Now I'm going to be more careful." Another man said, "I almost fell for a phone scam last month. Hearing this helped." I felt something warm spread through me. My pain was helping others. It meant something. That night, I sat on my porch again, wrapped in my blanket. The stars were bright, the air cool. I smiled softly. Maybe this was the purpose behind the hurt, to grow, to protect, to heal. Months passed peacefully. The restitution payments continued slowly but steadily. Each payment was a reminder that justice was real, that wrongs could be made right. I kept volunteering, kept writing, kept living. One afternoon, while browsing in a small bookstore downtown, I bumped into a man about my age. "Oh, I'm so sorry," we said at the same time. We both laughed. "I'm Mark," he said, offering a friendly smile. "Marissa," I replied. We ended up chatting about books for almost half an hour. He was recently divorced, loved gardening, and volunteered at an animal shelter. Before leaving, he asked, "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" I hesitated only a second. "I'd like that," I said. We exchanged numbers. As I walked out of the bookstore, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Our coffee dates turned into long walks, long talks, shared laughter. He listened when I told him about my past, not with pity, but with respect. "You're strong," he said softly one evening. "I just survived," I replied. He smiled. "Sometimes that's the same thing." I didn't rush into anything. I took my time, let trust build slowly, brick by brick. And it felt good, safe. Life wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful again. And for the first time since that knock on my door, I wasn't looking over my shoulder anymore. By the time a year had passed since the whole ordeal, my life felt like a tapestry slowly being rewoven. Each thread, every choice I made, strengthened the pattern instead of unraveling it. The mornings were quiet again. The smell of coffee brewing, the hum of my kettle, the faint rustle of leaves outside my window. I had started leaving my porch door open during the day to let sunlight flood in. It reminded me that life could be warm, even after betrayal. Mark and I were slowly building something tender, nothing rushed. Simple breakfasts at local cafes, walks in the park, and evenings spent reading side by side. I realized that trusting again didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant letting it teach me how to choose better. One day, as I was walking home from the clinic, my neighbor waved me over. "Marissa, you won't believe it. Leela's release date is coming up," Mrs. Carter said, her voice low and cautious. I paused mid-step. My heart skipped. I know," I said slowly. "I've been thinking about it." Are you going to see her?" she asked tentatively. I shook my head. "I don't think so. Not yet." Even though she had apologized, even though justice had been served, there was no rush to reintroduce her into my life. Some bridges, I realized, are better left burned or rebuilt carefully, brick by brick. That evening, I sat in my living room and pulled out my notebook. I wrote down the first day I realized something was wrong with Leela's story, then the night I saw Daniel at my door, then the weeks of fear, uncertainty, and betrayal, and finally the months of healing and rediscovery. The act of writing felt like stitching the torn pieces of my life back together. Each word was a reminder that I had survived, and that survival had shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more compassionate, not naive, not bitter, just human. A few weeks later, I decided to host a small tea gathering at my home, just a few friends, nothing extravagant. The moment Leela's absence became apparent, I realized I didn't miss her. What I missed was the version of our friendship I had imagined, a world where loyalty and honesty existed without compromise. As I poured tea for my friends, I felt content, warmth in my chest, laughter bouncing off the walls, a quiet peace that didn't demand drama or betrayal to feel alive. Then, one afternoon, an unexpected letter arrived. It was from Leela. I hesitated before opening it. The envelope was plain, her handwriting neat but shaky. Inside, "Marissa, I'm getting out soon. I won't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know I've changed. I've had time to think about the hurt I caused and the life I almost destroyed. I'm sorry for everything." I set it down and took a deep breath. A wave of something strange passed over me. Not anger, not sadness, but release. I whispered softly to the empty room, "I forgive you. For me, not for you." That was the final piece. Life moved forward like sunlight through morning curtains. I watched my roses bloom in the garden. I walked through the park and felt the wind brush against my face. I laughed with Mark over something silly. I helped friends, neighbors, and even strangers. I realized that healing wasn't just an act of survival. It was an act of courage. And the biggest lesson I had learned? Not everyone we trust will honor it. Not every friendship lasts forever. But the way we respond, the way we reclaim our lives, defines us far more than their betrayal ever could. A few months later, while sipping tea on the porch, I felt a small hand on my shoulder. It was my niece, Lily. "Aunt Marissa," she said softly, "tell me a story." I smiled and pulled her onto my lap. Once, I trusted someone very much, and they hurt me. But I learned that even when people betray us, we can choose kindness, patience, and strength. And in the end, we can find our way back to peace. She snuggled closer. And for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that peace wasn't just a dream, it was real. Over time, I realized my life no longer revolved around what Leela had done. My happiness wasn't stolen. My trust wasn't broken beyond repair. It had been tested, yes, but I had passed. And now my story was about growth, healing, and resilience. I often think about that knock at my door, the moment everything changed, the shock, the fear, the betrayal, but also the clarity, the truth, the strength I didn't know I had. It taught me that even when someone you love deceives you, you can rebuild, not just your life, but your faith in yourself. The months that followed felt like the first real chapter of my life in years. I had reclaimed my home, my peace, and even my trust in the world. Small victories stacked on top of one another. A clean kitchen on a Sunday morning, a perfectly brewed cup of tea, laughter with Mark, quiet walks in the park. Every small moment reminded me that life, even after betrayal, could still be beautiful. One evening, as I was tending to my roses, I noticed a small envelope tucked between the petals of a pink bloom. I picked it up carefully. It was from Leela again. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Marissa, I don't expect anything from you. No forgiveness, no friendship. I just wanted to let you know that I am leaving town after my release. I am seeking help, starting over. I want to live differently. I exhaled slowly, a sense of closure settling over me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I simply felt calm. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. Sometimes it's about honesty finally being acknowledged and the wronged party reclaiming their power. I folded the note and placed it in my notebook, a memento not of pain, but of survival. Around the same time, Mark suggested a small weekend trip to the countryside. I think we could use a change of scenery, he said, smiling. I hesitated. My life had been so cautious for so long, but the thought of escaping the walls of my home, even for a day, was exhilarating. We drove through winding roads, the trees a riot of autumn colors. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. Birds called to one another from high branches, and the sun glinted off the river that cut through the valley. We found a small cabin to stay in. Cozy, warm, perfect. That night, we sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind whisper through the trees. I never thought I'd feel like this again, I admitted quietly. Like what? Asked Mark. Safe, content, happy. He reached for my hand. You deserve this. I smiled, feeling the tension of the past year melt away. Back home, I took up new hobbies, cooking with recipes I had avoided because they reminded me of Leela's visits, gardening in more serious ways, growing herbs, vegetables, and even a small lemon tree. Writing, but this time more purposefully. I started drafting a personal essay on trust, deception, and recovery, not for publication, just for myself. It felt liberating. The more I invested in myself, the lighter I felt. One day, a neighbor approached me, a young woman named Sarah. Marissa, I just wanted to thank you, she said nervously. I attended that financial safety talk you gave at the community center. I smiled. I'm glad it helped. She nodded. I was almost scammed by someone close to me, but your story, it made me cautious. I think I avoided a huge mistake. Her words warmed my heart. You're welcome, I said. That's why I shared it. I realized then that my pain had purpose. It wasn't just a story of betrayal. It had become a story of empowerment. Weeks later, Mark and I attended a small gathering at the community library. One of the organizers asked if I would speak again, this time to a group of young adults about recognizing red flags in friendships and relationships. I felt nervous at first. Public speaking had never been my strength. But as I stood there, looking at attentive faces, I realized I didn't need to be perfect. I only needed to be honest. I trusted someone who wasn't trustworthy, I began, my voice calm but strong. And it hurt me deeply. But I also learned that betrayal doesn't define you. How you respond does. And healing is possible. There were nods, quiet murmurs of agreement. A young woman approached me afterwards. "Thank you," she said, eyes glistening. "I needed to hear that. I've been doubting myself for so long." I smiled gently. Trust yourself. That's where it starts. Back at home, I started reflecting more on the contrast between fear and courage. For months, I had been afraid of being deceived again, afraid of trusting, afraid of opening my heart. But fear doesn't make life safe. Courage does. Courage allows you to reclaim your narrative, to decide who belongs in your story and who doesn't. And I realized something else. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet choice to keep going, to plant a rose even when the soil is hard, to walk into the sunlight even when your heart still carries shadows. As winter approached, the first frost dusted my garden. I sipped my tea on the porch, wrapped in a thick blanket. Mark joined me with a small plate of cookies. We watched the sunset, a palette of golds and purples stretching across the horizon. "I feel like we've both grown a lot this year," he said softly. "I think so too," I replied. "I never thought I'd get here, but here I am." He reached for my hand. "I'm glad I'm here with you." I squeezed his hand gently, feeling gratitude for the life I had rebuilt. Not perfect, not untouched by pain, but real. Beautiful in its own way. That night, as I went to bed, I thought about Leela one last time, not with anger, not with regret, just acknowledgement. She had played her part, I had played mine, and now the story was entirely mine. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark. I survived. I grew. I am whole. And for the first time, I truly believed it. The next few months felt almost surreal in their calmness. I had rebuilt my life brick by brick. Each day brought ordinary joys that I had once taken for granted. The smell of fresh bread baking, the laughter of children outside my window, the warmth of sunlight spilling across the kitchen floor. I no longer lived in the shadow of fear or betrayal. Instead, I lived in moments, small, vivid, alive. Mark and I had grown closer, not just as companions, but as equals. There was trust between us, gentle and patient. I had learned that trust could be given carefully, in pieces, and that it could grow stronger when nurtured. One Saturday morning, we decided to host a small brunch for a few neighbors and friends. Nothing extravagant, just pancakes, tea, and warm conversation. As I laid out plates and poured tea, I felt a quiet contentment that had eluded me for over a year. "Marissa, these pancakes are perfect," exclaimed Tasha, who had become one of my closest friends through the community center. I smiled. "Well, you helped me practice. You can't blame me for a little guidance." We laughed, and the room felt light, free of tension. As the guests mingled, I caught myself glancing at the doorway, half expecting the past to knock on my door again. But it never did. The past had become a series of lessons, not a haunting. Later, as the group helped clear the table, Mrs. Carter pulled me aside. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "I can see it in your eyes. You're at peace." I looked at her and nodded. It's been a journey, but I finally feel like myself again. She smiled warmly, and stronger than ever. Not everyone gets to that place. I took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. One evening, as autumn deepened and the leaves fell in fiery reds and golds, Mark and I took a walk through the park. The path was quiet except for the rustling leaves beneath our feet. "I can't believe how much has changed in just a year," he said softly. "Me neither," I replied. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living someone else's life, someone stronger, braver." He stopped and took my hands in his. "You are stronger, Marissa. I see it every day. You survived betrayal, loss, and fear, and yet here you are, kind, loving, and full of life." I felt tears prick my eyes, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of gratitude for everything I had endured and overcome. Back at home, I often reflected on the twists of fate that had brought me here. Lila's deception had shattered my trust. Yes, it had left me questioning myself, my judgment, my friendships, but it also forced me to see my own resilience, to understand my own strength, to reclaim my voice and my life. And Daniel? Seeing him at my door had been the shock that began it all, but even that moment became a catalyst, a turning point that taught me vigilance and courage. I realized that life's hardest lessons often come from those we trust the most, but surviving them is what shapes our character. I also began to write more intentionally, not just for myself, but for others. I shared my story anonymously on blogs and community forums, hoping someone else might find guidance in my experience. Responses came slowly at first, people thanking me for sharing, telling me they had avoided being scammed, or that my story gave them courage to set boundaries with toxic friends. Each message was a reminder that pain, when faced honestly, could be a source of strength for me and for others. By winter, I had grown into a rhythm that felt steady, solid, and warm. I decorated my home for the holidays, not for appearances, but for the simple joy of making spaces comforting and safe. I spent evenings reading by the fireplace, sipping chamomile tea, reflecting on how far I had come. I no longer felt that tight knot of betrayal in my chest. I didn't replay moments of fear or distrust. Instead, I focused on growth, love, and hope. Even Lila's name had lost its sting. It was simply part of the past, a chapter, not the whole story. One snowy afternoon, I went out to my garden, brushing the frost off my roses. Mark followed with a steaming cup of cocoa, handing it to me with a smile. "You've created something beautiful here," he said, gesturing at the roses in the warm glow of the house behind us. I smiled. "I've learned that even after everything, life can bloom again. Sometimes you just have to nurture it yourself." He squeezed my hand gently. "And you've done that brilliantly." For the first time in a long while, I truly believed it. I had survived the betrayal of a best friend. I had confronted the shock of seeing someone I trusted alive when I thought they were gone. I had reclaimed my life, my savings, and my peace. And I had found a love that was careful, patient, and kind. Through it all, I had learned that betrayal doesn't define you. Actions do. Healing does. Courage does. And in the end, I had chosen all three. Winter faded slowly into spring, and with it came a sense of renewal I hadn't known I needed. The air smelled of damp earth and blooming flowers. The sun felt warmer, softer, like it was washing the past away with its light. I stood on my porch one morning, sipping tea, watching the roses I had nurtured bloom in gentle pinks and yellows. Each flower seemed to tell me a story of survival, patience, and growth. I realized that life, no matter how cruel it might get at times, always offers a chance to start over. I thought often about the lessons I had learned. Trust is precious. It should be given carefully, but not withheld entirely, for it is also the foundation of connection and love. Pain is inevitable. Betrayal is too, but what we do with that pain, the choices we make afterward, determines the rest of our story. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean condoning the wrongs of others. It simply means freeing yourself from carrying the weight of anger and resentment. And finally, courage isn't always loud. Sometimes courage is quiet, the decision to keep moving forward when every instinct says to stop, to shut down, or to retreat. Mark and I continued to build our life together, slowly, intentionally. We laughed often, sometimes loudly, sometimes softly. We learned each other's quirks, habits, and fears. We became a team, partners in the truest sense of the word. I realized that part of healing is allowing yourself to be vulnerable again, to trust, to hope, to love. And that was perhaps the bravest choice of all. I kept in touch with a few friends from the community center who had supported me during my darkest days. Their encouragement, their stories, and their presence reminded me that even after betrayal, human connection is still possible and even beautiful. I began mentoring young women who had faced deception and loss. I shared my story not to relive the pain, but to teach resilience. I reminded them that even when someone you love deceives you, it doesn't mean you're broken. It simply means you're human, and humans have a remarkable capacity to heal. One quiet evening, as I sat in my favorite armchair with my cat purring beside me, I reflected on Leela and the past year. I didn't hate her anymore. I didn't want revenge or justice in the way that once burned in me. Justice had been served through the system, and life had served my own form of justice through healing and wisdom. I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. And in doing so, I felt lighter than I had in months. As I looked out the window at the garden, I thought about all of you watching my story unfold. Perhaps some of you have been betrayed by someone you loved deeply. Perhaps someone you trusted broke your heart. Perhaps your world, too, felt like it was crumbling around you. I want you to know this. The pain will pass. The anger will fade. But your strength will remain if you let it. Your life can bloom again even after the darkest winter. I want to leave you with one thought. Would you have found the courage to face betrayal, reclaim your life, and choose peace over pain? I hope that my story reminds you that you can, that you are capable of surviving the unimaginable, growing stronger from it, and finding joy again. If my story resonates with you, please consider sharing it. Maybe it can help someone else who is struggling to navigate trust, loss, or betrayal. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories of real people, real pain, and real strength, subscribe to follow along. We don't have to face life's storms alone. We can survive, we can heal, and we can bloom again.